Okay, we're going to get started. So hello, everyone, wherever you're dialing in from, and to everyone that's joined us so far. Thank you very much for joining us today for the launch of the Emerging Voices Network's latest policy cycle on de-siloing existential threats. My name is Anuradha Damale-Day, and I manage the Inclusive International Security Programme at BASIC, which houses the Emerging Voices Network, or the EVN. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping bits and a bit of information. Please tweet with the hashtag EVN Launch 23 and tag EVN Nuclear, Basic and Ploughshares. And while we're here, a big thank you to Ploughshares and the Equity Rises Initiative for making this particular policy cycle possible for us today. Remember that you can use the Q&A function if you have any questions for our working group leads and so on. We'll have a session on that at the end of the day. So just to give you a brief overview of how today is going to go, we're going to start with a welcome and a general background of the EVN, which will be very short. We're going to introduce the 2023 EVN policy cycle, and I'll be handing over to Kim Obergfaell at that point. And then we're going to hand it over to the main event of today, which is our 10 fantastic working group chairs, who will be presenting the 5 working groups and sort of what the content is for this policy cycle. And then question and answers at the end if you have any. So very briefly, to let you know, the EVN was founded in 2020 through a policy cycle process that focused on opportunities in the NPT. And from its beginning, it has always centered equity and accessibility. Its goal has always been to facilitate truly global dialogue and exchange, particularly platforming the views of those who are not often heard due to geographic, gender, race, disability, or any other minoritizing factor. It creates a space for those who are underrepresented to collaborate with the general mainstream nuclear space. And we do this in many different ways, including through our policy cycles and through the working papers that are submitted to several UN conferences, through events and through collaboration with different nuclear forums. Over the past 2 years, the EVN has evolved into a group of over 180 early career experts from different backgrounds, different disciplines, and from all over the world. And we are a digital first network that enables us to ensure that accessibility and equity remain at the center of our programming. The goal of the EVN is to engage this group in many different ways with mainstream nuclear and international security forums. And that is through policy cycles such as this one, through working papers, through events such as the NPT RevCon series that we ran last year, through future events such as the Masterclass series by senior experts. So if you're interested in that, please do get in touch with us, and EVN-led peer-to-peer seminars. We'd also like you to keep an eye out for our upcoming PrepCom Youth and Early Career consultation. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to my brilliant colleague, Policy Fellow Kim Obergfaell, who, as well as being a Policy Fellow in BASIC, focusing on risk reduction, on NATO and on general nuclear disarmament, is a policy fellow within the programme and has been managing this policy cycle. So thank you very much, Kim. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Anu. What a great introduction. And yeah, very excited to be here today and kick off this policy cycle. Just to go straight into the next slide. Thanks again to the Ploughshares Equity Rises Fund, as Anu already mentioned, who's made this cycle possible. This year's cycle is dedicated to breaking down silos and challenging ideas and approaches within and adjacent to the nuclear policy field. We believe that confronting, reflecting, and addressing key topics that are vital to transforming contemporary and future nuclear policy decisions, and that is in the best interests of peace and security. So we've come up with 5 working groups that are going to be led by 2 co-chairs each, and they will be researching that topic, choosing a challenge they want to focus on, and then drafting a policy paper, which will include a set of policy recommendations. We will then collate these papers and put them together into a resulting edited anthology, which will be presented at a release event in July 2023. So cycle, note that down already, and we'll be excited to come back to you with more information in June. So the groups will be meeting for the first time next week. So this event also acts as an introduction for our brilliant policy cycle cohort, many of which are here today. And in the meantime, during this cycle, we've also organized some other EVN activities, those that Anu has already mentioned, including some expert masterclasses that will take place at varying dates over the next few months. And at least one of them will be on each of the working group topics. And that will help guide our working groups and provide them with an opportunity to ask questions about the topics and also hear just another point of view on each of these topics. So overall, for this policy cycle, we have 77 members registered, and they come from around 30 nations from truly all parts of the world. And of those 77 members, 57% identify as women. So we're really happy and proud of this diversity within this year's cohort, and we really hope that that will also be reflected in the policy papers that they will produce. So now moving on to the next five, to the 5 working groups. They are, first of all, nuclear weapons issues and climate change, led by Nivedita and Yasmin. Then challenging racism and white supremacy in nuclear weapons policymaking, led by Halima and Mari. Increasing equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the nuclear weapons policy field and within the community of practitioners, a group led by Sneha and Ian, and examining and dismantling military-industrial complexes, led by Vivienne and Orion. And last, nuclear weapons issues and social justice, led by Guy and Niels. So now we have asked our working group chairs to prepare a brief presentation about their topics, why they think these are important challenges to tackle, and what potentially some of their objectives are for this policy cycle. So I'm really excited to turn over to our working group chairs now and look forward to hearing their first impressions about this cycle's topics. So without further ado, first up are Yasmin Auda and Nivedita S, who are leading the group of nuclear weapon issues and climate change. Over to you.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Anu. We'll sort of be going back and forth. I hope that's okay as far as the sort of setup is concerned. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today as co-chair of this working group alongside my co-chair, Nivi. My name is Jasmine Auda. I'm currently based in Jordan, and I'm co-founder and COO of Ambit Advisory. It's an NGO that works across the Middle East on issues at the nexus of security and development. So nuclear and climate issues are very much at the forefront of that work. And previously, I was deputy director of NESIS, which is an organization focused on risk reduction of CBRN fields, also across the Middle East region. And my interest is in the policy side of these issues. So having worked with governments, with practitioners on the ground, and with scientific and technical communities, my hope is that I'll be able to effectively leverage this experience toward contributing to the working group, which I know enjoys such a diverse composition of backgrounds and perspectives that will be instrumental to unpacking this issue.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nivedita, or Nivi for short. I work as a research fellow at the Center for International Law, the National University of Singapore, working on nuclear law and policy issues. My research interest focuses on intersections between nuclear and other areas of law or disciplines. My previous work has been primarily looking at the nexus between nuclear and climate change from an energy perspective, as well as the use of environmental mechanisms in the nuclear context. I am super excited to be the co-chair of this working group with Yasmin in this policy cycle. As an international lawyer working in this space, I have a perspective that tends to be grounded in rules, norms, and practices, which I actually hope will provide a solid basis for our policy recommendations. In addition, my previous experience working on projects with collective outputs, I hope will allow me to facilitate the workings of this group, as well as contribute in the shaping of contours of our analysis and policy recommendations. I am truly looking forward to geeking out on an issue that I'm very interested and passionate about with like-minded people and getting to know the other voices in this area from all over the world. And Kim mentioned 77 members from around 30 nations. Super excited here.
So as far as the working group's general topic and just a very brief background, so we know that globally that the threats posed by both nuclear weapons and climate change are real, they're existential, and they're also rapidly increasing. And when we think of nuclear weapons, we probably automatically think of their political or strategic or security implications, but probably don't as often consider their consequences to the climate as often as we should. And this working group is therefore based on the, I guess, fundamental premise that there is a robust relationship between nuclear weapons and climate change. And this is essentially what we're setting out to substantiate. When it comes to the actual use of nuclear weapons, the impacts are massive in terms of their environmental consequences, but there is also an increasing recognition that even just the possession of weapons can have a significant impact on climate change as well. And this relationship between the two goes both ways as well, because climate change, which is often referred to as a threat multiplier, could also exacerbate the conditions that would lead to conflict more broadly, including the possibility of a nuclear war.
So why is this topic important and why now? As Jasmine mentioned, two of the gravest risks to humanity have been said to be nuclear war and climate change. These threats are intertwined in countless ways. And while we now see regularly that climate change effects, including influencing weather patterns, disrupting agricultural production, among others, it is far too seldom that we consider that such effects could stem from the use of nuclear weapons as well, especially in light of the current geopolitics and the very real threat of the use of nuclear weapons in a world that is already trying and perhaps maybe even struggling to combat climate change. We see the intersection between these two threats more clearly, stressing the importance and the challenge of addressing this pressing issue today.
And this sort of brings us to, I guess, the main objectives for the working group. And I think from our perspective, the primary objective will be to explore the extent of this connection and correlation between nuclear weapons and climate change. We hope to accomplish this through the use of interdisciplinary research that utilizes not only case studies, but forecasting or modeling techniques as well that look at both the direct and indirect impacts on climate change. And in doing so, we're thinking maybe that the research will revolve around three main themes, namely the use of nuclear weapons. So when a weapon is actually detonated and the catastrophic effects of something like a nuclear winter. One of the themes will also be the possession of the nuclear weapons. So the stockpiling, maintenance, and the testing of these weapons arsenals, and what long-term consequences this can have for climate change. And the last theme, where possible, would be to look at the pursuit of these nuclear weapons. Would there be some sort of impact from countries with current or planned nuclear programs if there's potential to proliferate? I think that this could be something very interesting to explore, but we of course recognize that it might be a bit more difficult to research when we're talking about pursuit and intention. And the final thing I want to say on objectives is that we also recognize that there are a lot of case studies in literature on the links between nuclear power and nuclear proliferation, but our work on this topic will be very conscious of the fact that we shouldn't be conflating nuclear power with that of nuclear weapons.
And to add on to what Jasmine said, three additional objectives is to identify the key sub-themes and issues and analyze them with the view to coming up policy recommendations that we hope will make an impact, to ensure that all the different diverse perspectives are being considered, and to make this a collaborative effort that will be enriching and an enjoyable experience for everyone. So really looking forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was really interesting, and it gave us a really good overview of what you'll be working on with your working groups. So moving on to the next group, which is the Challenging Racism and White Supremacy in Nuclear Weapons Policymaking Group, which is co-chaired by Halima Sadia and Mari Faines. Over to you two.
Thank you so much, Kim. My name is Mari Faines, and I'm very excited to be co-chairing with my co-chair Halima. We're going to do brief introductions and then run through why this topic is important, why we're excited about it, and why we think this will genuinely impact the nuclear policy community. To start, as I said, I'm Mari. I am currently the partner for mobilization at Global Zero, which is an international organization working towards the abolition of nuclear weapons. My research work is focused on the politics of conflict rights and justice, looking at systems disparities, and particularly looking at nuclear intersectionality, the ways in which nuclear weapons impact social justice and other disenfranchised communities. I come at this work with a plethora of knowledge when working with groups like Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, both in the United States and in the UK. And I am just so excited to be here with all of you. And I'll toss it over to Halima to tell us about herself.
Yeah, thank you, Murray. So I'm very happy to be here, very excited to be a part of EVN's policy cycle. I'm Halima Sadia. I am a lecturer at the National University of Modern Languages and a research fellow at the Rose Initiative in Islamabad. I'm also a PhD candidate at the Center for National Peace and Stability at the National University of Science and Technology here in Pakistan. And my areas of research, generally, I look at nuclear issues from a post-positivist lens. So it's like literally everything under the nuclear umbrella. It's non-proliferation, nuclear policies of primarily India and Pakistan, nuclear strategy, safety, security issues, and also the peaceful application of nuclear technology and nuclear disarmament. I'll start off with the intro of our working group, which relates to challenging racism and white supremacy in the nuclear weapons policymaking. And then we'll move on to talking about why this is so important to talk about now. There are a few questions that researchers and activists have thought about, have worked on. For example, is non-proliferation a white man's problem? Did US decision to attack Japan had any racist undertones? Was race a factor in US threats to use nuclear weapons in Korean and Vietnam wars? And why is it that the nuclear testing by US and France only harmed the non-white territories and people? So the important issue right now here is to question if race still continues to play a role in nuclear weapons policy making in the 21st century. Now, as we look at this working group, there are two ways to perhaps look at the topic. One relates to the idea of whether the indigenous and non-white voices are ignored in the nuclear weapons policy making in the West. And the other is the racist undertones that run through the Western non-proliferation policies against the threat of proliferation from non-Western countries. So why is it problematic? How do these policies go against the principles of non-discrimination and undiminished security for all? Now, if we only focus on the white versus Black and indigenous factor within the context of Western countries, we'll risk ignoring the non-West dynamics of the white supremacy. This is why our working group will take a holistic approach and analyze both of these dynamics.
Thank you, Halima. And I guess the question then becomes, why is this topic important now? It's always been important. There's absolutely no question about that. But when you think of the trajectory of the past half decade, in particular, the rise of things like the Arab Spring, the Black Lives Matter movement, so many places in which we've seen disenfranchised communities push for more equity, for more inclusion. The one space where we haven't seen that inclusivity is in how we do policy making, particularly around national security and foreign policy. White supremacy in nuclear policy has always been there. Think about the ways in which we racialized who is allowed to have these weapons and how they are allowed to use these weapons. When we think about the current injustices about who's impacted by things like uranium mining or just nuclear testing in general, we often see the ways in which disenfranchised communities have been impacted by inequitable systems which are built on white supremacist notions. That being said, in this moment, as people are thinking about what is proliferation, and how things like the Russia-Ukraine war are working across global color lines and how we're talking about things are impacted. The place that people are not having this conversation is what is the impacts and equity and white supremacy and racism in abundance. When you think about, I know in the US yesterday, we had MLK Day, Martin Luther King Day. The civil rights movement was deeply entrenched and working for a world without nuclear weapons. We've seen non-Western countries be deeply entrenched in working for a world without nuclear weapons. We're hoping by capturing this moment, we'll be able to offer policy solutions that bring these people and these voices to the forefront that have often been so left out.
Yeah, and that kind of logically connects with our objectives. And what do we bring to this working group? So there's a need to position the nuclear weapons policymaking in the broader context of equality, equity, and diversity. So keeping that in mind, our specific objectives are to understand how racism affects nuclear weapons policymaking, to understand the way white supremacy has shaped the non-proliferation and disarmament debate, and then to suggest policy prescriptions to make nuclear weapons policymaking more equitable, diverse, and non-discriminatory. Now, specifically with regards to me, what I bring to this working group, so as a Pakistani woman, I feel I bring a unique point of view to this debate. My hands-on experience as an arms control policy expert and a post-positivist researcher in the nuclear field adds up to a unique worldview and a meta-theoretical approach. Now, this makes my research novel, and I am able to explore a different angle to the non-proliferation challenges. And while most of my current research is theory intensive, I attempt to demonstrate its practical utility for policymakers and to make it relevant to the current arms control and non-proliferation debate. And this EVN cycle, this particular working group, will provide me with that avenue to explore it further.
And just to quickly build upon that, I think for me as a Black woman who has grown up and lived in America, I think we've often seen ourselves left out of safety and community care. We've seen the ways that policy, particularly policy around militarization, has consistently left us out of the narrative. When I think about the ways that white supremacy and racism impact me, it's not just from a US context, it's from living in places like England. It's from thinking from a broader diasporic perspective. And I am often so frustrated when I look at people like me who said, I never thought that this issue was important. I never saw myself in this issue, primarily because they were excluded from the conversation. I'm hoping that my existence and Halima's existence in this space in rewriting this policy changes the face of what inclusion and rewriting policy will look like, so that you won't have a chance where people don't feel like they have the right and the ownership to engage on such an important existential crisis.
Yeah, and then what do we hope to gain from participating and from working with others? So we believe that diversity of views enriches the debate, and we hope that this working group will be able to take a holistic view of the impact of racism and white supremacy on nuclear weapons policy making. Our lived experience as individuals and as part of our identity groups gives us, each one of us, an agency to think, act, talk, and write about these challenges in the nuclear domain. We hope to capitalize on this agency and to add to the knowledge production process regarding nuclear weapons policy making. And in the broader context of this EVN's policy cycle, we hope to put forth policy recommendations for a reorientation of the nuclear weapons policy making. Thank you so much for listening, and I would be so happy to know what your views are about our working group, and perhaps discuss this further in the Q&A.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. That was also another really interesting insight into the working group of challenging racism and white supremacy. We'll be moving on to another working group now, which is the increasing equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the nuclear weapons policy field and within the community of practitioners working group. And that working group is co-chaired by Sneha Nair and Ian Fleming-Sue. So over to you two. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. I think Ian and I are both really excited to be a part of this working group and this policy cycle in particular. We'll start with some brief introductions. My name is Sneha Nair. I'm a research analyst at the Stimson Center with the Nuclear Security Program and Partnerships in Proliferation Prevention Program. I have some previous experience with the CTBTO and the OPCW, so non-proliferation is a great love of mine, and that this is really exciting for this policy cycle in particular. I also work as a coordinator for the International Nuclear Security Forum, where I do a lot of civil society engagement and policymaker education, and also act as a focal point for that organization within the Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy. This working group and this policy cycle theme is really exciting to me because my research focuses on bias in nuclear security and examining how a lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in nuclear facilities can create security gaps in personnel surety programs. So I'm really excited to dive into this, and I'll hand over to Ian.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Fleming, and I'm currently a CTBT Senior Research Fellow, and I'm also an independent researcher at the same time. Previously, I've chaired the Peaceful Uses Youth Working Group during the 10th NPT Review Conference under the Emerging Voices Network. And my areas of specialization are nuclear diplomacy, non-proliferation, disarmament, and disarmament of the Korean Peninsula. Over to you, Sneha.
Thanks, Ian. So I'm going to quickly introduce our working group topic, which is increasing equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the nuclear weapons policy field and within the community of practitioners. I think that we're very lucky that we got to go after Mari and Halima, because their work is going to be something that we get to pull the thread on a little bit in terms of what we're going to do with our working group. To sort of hammer in some points that they already made. Nuclear weapons tests and production by nuclear armed countries display a pattern of inequality that has roots in the earliest days of the Manhattan Project. Nuclear weapons were built and tests were often conducted on lands that belonged to the most vulnerable people in society, indigenous populations, disenfranchised communities, former colonies, and people of color, without their consent or with any consideration given to their lives. And the effects of these choices have impacted these communities for decades, as they bear the effects of uranium mining and nuclear testing on their lands and bodies without being involved in any of the decision-making or policy-making that goes into the nuclear weapons policy space. Increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the nuclear policy field means approaching the challenges facing the community as deep-rooted structural issues that requires a reimagining of how we conceptualize threats and how we decide who is worthy of contributing knowledge and developing policy in the field. Diversifying the field means that involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds, gender, sexual orientations, and recognizing the interconnected nature of these categories. Inclusion means providing equal access to the opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized from knowledge production or decision-making processes. And equity is about promoting justice, impartiality, and fairness within the institution by understanding the root causes of the outcome disparities within our society. At the 10th NPT RevCon, the UN Undersecretary for Disarmament, Izumi Nakamitsu, stressed that DEI was not a question of equity alone, but about rethinking traditional security and nuclear disarmament discourses. And this is something that I think Ian and I are really going to try and examine with the rest of our working group. Our paper is going to try and investigate ways to increase equity, diversity, and inclusivity and showcase the current gaps that act as a hindrance to DEI, offer recommendations that would facilitate more participation and inclusion in the field of non-proliferation, and create better policies in the field overall. I'm going to hand it over to Ian to sort of continue.
So why is this topic or challenge important? Why address it now? Diversity, equity, and inclusion policies are created top-down and focus on addressing the symptoms of inequality rather than the root causes. Gender gaps still persist. For instance, less than 1 in 5 heads of delegations to the 10th NPT Review Conference were women, compared to the 2015 RevCon that had 22% of heads of the delegation, which were women. The inherent inequality of nuclear weapon space has never been more on display. In the last year, a nuclear weapon state invaded a non-nuclear weapon state, setting back disarmament and non-proliferation efforts by decades. Threat of nuclear use, nuclear testing, and nuclear proliferation have continued to grow throughout 2022. Not only do these equity issues exist on state level, but inclusion and secrecy have been a trademark of the nuclear community since the inception of the field. Participation in the nuclear weapons policy field has historically been restricted to those in power, and the exclusion of women, people of color, queer communities, and people with disabilities has made for poorly informed, inequitable, and exclusionary nuclear weapon policy. Diversity and inclusion of young people in multilateral nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation forums is vital, as they bring a different perspective on discussions of disarmament. The participation of the LGBTQI+ persons in these matters should be encouraged, as they face constant discrimination, exclusion from certain aspects. People of color are disproportionately represented in places where hard security decisions are made. The diversity and inclusion gap should be closed. We should aim for the field to be a true representation of all cultures, races, genders, and sexualities. Lack of effort to actively engage persons with disabilities in nuclear non-proliferation policy making, despite the relevance of disability rights and perspective for nuclear disarmament. The need to link disarmament and non-proliferation with other peace development, human rights, and environmental agendas, for instance, integrating the youth peace and security and women peace and security agendas with nuclear disarmament.
So I'll go ahead and start us off on some of our objectives that we hope to achieve by being a part of this working group and contributing to this policy cycle. I think that both of us are really excited by what we can potentially bring to the working group, as well as what we're going to be able to achieve with the paper and by working with a lot of the incredible and talented and brilliant people that are a part of the Emerging Voices Network. For myself, I'm currently conducting research on DEI issues in the US nuclear security field and links with domestic violent extremism as part of the National Nuclear Security Administration's Nuclear Security Women Initiative. This research, I think, ties in really well to the work that we're doing here, and I'm really excited to see how the members of our working group are going to be able to pull on those threads to talk about how issues of DEI need to be addressed in a more global way, rather than just focusing on US specific examples, which is what I've been working on. I think that with this paper, we get to really work on examining how to create structural change in the nuclear weapons policy field by acknowledging the biases that inform exclusionary and inequitable practices within the community. And by working with the Emerging Voices Network on this policy cycle, we're going to be able to draw on the lived experiences and expertise of an incredibly diverse set of young professionals to inform better policy that reflects the realities of those working in the nuclear policy space and helps us understand how inequality and inclusion at the top level of the nuclear weapons policy field reflects everyday lived experiences.
I personally think that both of our experiences as people of color will be very vital in how we approach this paper. Not only do I represent a group of previously marginalized people, but I also am a proponent of inclusion and diversity in all matters. I've experienced in research and previously chaired working groups. My main objective, however, is to make that our paper showcases that nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament is more successful when conversations place people and inclusivity at the center. That is to say, women's equal participation, youth engagement, and the inclusion of the LGBTQI+ is important for the future of the global non-proliferation regime. The aim of the paper will be to illustrate how diversity, inclusion, and equality are key in moving toward a safer future. Furthermore, inclusivity makes for better and more effective arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. To accurately assess how different populations and groups are affected, we must give greater consideration to diversity and inclusion in all processes and decision-making bodies. Taking a holistic approach to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation is to understand that nuclear weapons have different effects on different demographics, as evidenced in studies with survivors of nuclear weapons use and testing. In conclusion, we look forward to producing a policy document that will ensure gender equality and inclusion are reflected in the outcome of our collective work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you for providing that overview of the Increasing Equity, Diversity and Inclusivity group. We're now going to move on to the next group, which is co-chaired by Vivian Zhang and Orion Noda. And that is the group on examining and dismantling the military-industrial complex. So over to you, Vivian and Orion.
Thank you very much, Kim. And we are very excited to join everyone today at this launch event. So I will start us off by giving some background on the topic and talk about the importance of addressing this issue after giving a short introduction about myself, and Orion will go after that to talk about our objectives as well as what we hope to achieve from this policy cycle. So a brief introduction about myself. My name is Vivian Zhang. I'm currently working as graduate professional at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, where I am supporting research on nuclear, biological, chemical weapons disarmament and diplomacy in the Weapons of Mass Destruction program. Before this, I worked with the Canadian government in its missions abroad to Western Europe and Southeast Asian countries. And I received my master's degree in international security from Sciences Po Paris. I'm very looking forward to be co-chairing this working group and to be working with such a diverse and motivated and knowledgeable EVN policy cycle cohort. So about our topic, the military-industrial complex. So to start off, US President Dwight Eisenhower coined the term military-industrial complex, the MIC, in his farewell address in 1961 to describe the ties between the government and the defense industry. While he talked about, the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power, which is kind of what we're dealing with at this point. And the MIC forms this relationship of common interest that mutually benefits weapon suppliers and defense industry, private corporations, as well as policymakers or policy influencers who support increases in armaments and increases in military spending, for example. And this dynamic, as we see, underpins the national security foundations of not only just the US, but many other countries as well, even when the reasons being used to justify armaments or a rise in military spending, such as boosting nuclear weapons manufacturing, are not concretely or necessarily supported by public opinion and even international relations policies. So therefore, in this working group, we will study together the nuclear MIC and see what options are available for disarmament by way of reducing the nuclear MIC's influence on policy, at least. And why this is an important challenge to tackle is because dismantling the nuclear MIC is crucial for the paramount importance of nuclear weapons in international relations and in foreign policy to be lessened, meaning that this is a key step in nuclear disarmament. And that also the economical incentives of a strengthened nuclear MIC, so during the Cold War, damaged security by overfunding weapons, which led to arms races, and also by fear-mongering, which ostracized many peoples, as well as its detrimental effects on the environment in terms of increased military spending, as well as increased in the production of weapons as well. So addressing not only the use and the threat of nuclear weapons, but the incentives and the power structure of the military-industrial complex is a positive step towards examining the root causes of arms control and disarmament issues. If the structure cannot be dismantled, at least we need more transparency, which partially should be achieved through looking at the military-industrial complex more in detail. And now Orion will go take us further and talk about our objectives and what we hope to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Hello, everyone. My name is Anuradha. I am a PhD candidate at King's College London and the University of São Paulo. And together with Vivian, I'm co-chairing this amazing working group I'm very excited about. So while Vivian talked about the introduction of our topic of the working group, I'll spend the next couple of minutes walking you guys through our objectives and our expectations for the work of the policy cycle. So broadly speaking, we aim to contribute to a safer, more transparent and democratic environment regarding nuclear policy and nuclear decision-making. Recent literature and events, such as a debate on sole authority under the Trump administration, suggests that nuclear war planning and decision-making is increasingly leaving and distancing itself from democratic sphere and the democratic processes. We also aim to raise awareness of crucial issues that are often concealed by bureaucratic obstacles. Nuclear security affects everyone on the planet, and still few people know the danger we currently find ourselves in, given the current state of nuclear stockpiles and nuclear policies, basically a relic of Cold War times. To do so, our goal is to provoke discussions about the establishment of military-industrial complexes and their overwhelming influence on nuclear policy, nuclear thinking, and in overall nuclear ontology. Our topic is quite broad, but we shall identify specific challenges and then specific audience to give our recommendations to. Our end goal is to produce impactful and objective recommendations to promote transparent relations between government and the public regarding nuclear decision-making, nuclear policy, and nuclear forces. For this effort, it is crucial to engage with young leaders throughout the world, making sure all voices are heard, which I think our current cohort is doing a great job at. Issues of nuclear security are not relevant only to nuclear weapon states, nuclear decision makers. Similarly, these issues cannot be controlled by corporate greed and vested interests of military industrial complexes under the guise of maintaining peace and security throughout the world. These issues affect us all, and we must work together for that safer, more transparent, and democratic environment. While military-industrial complexes keep dictating the course of nuclear thinking and even nuclear research, hindering independent scientific work and viable alternatives to our current nuclear realities, we are in a grave danger. And our work here is to move towards dismantling these threatening structures of the stranglehold of military-industrial complexes on our current situation regarding nuclear policy and nuclear weapons. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. And I am very excited about the work we're going to do here.
Thank you so much, Orion and Vivian. We're really looking forward to hearing more about the outcome of your working group discussions later on. And then our last working group, last but not least, we have Niels Rensen and Guy Blaise-Stormore-Fugap, who are co-chairing the group on nuclear weapons issues and social justice. So over to Niels and Guy.
Thank you very much, Kim. My name is Niels. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be co-chairing this working group on social justice together with Guy. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm currently a research assistant at the Center for Science and Security Studies at King's College London, where I'm working on irreversibility and nuclear disarmament. I'm also a board member of PACWatch Netherlands, and I have a master's in war studies. And for my dissertation, I looked at the conceptualization of order and justice in the context of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I've been involved in the Emerging Voicing Network since the beginning, so I already had the opportunity to do some research in the Disruptive Technology Working Group in the first policy cycle. So that's briefly about me, and with that, I'll hand it over to Guy.
Thank you, Niels. Hi, everyone. My name is Guy Blaise-Stormore-Fugap. I'm from Cameroon in the Central Africa. I'm the coordinator of the organization called Cameroon for a World Beyond War, which aim at looking at alternatives, a non-violent alternative for peace, as our country has been affected with conflict. And in the nuclear disarmament work, I've been doing this, looking from the African perspectives, how to involve more African countries in the treaty on the proliferation of nuclear weapons. I've been advocating for African countries to be part of the treaty. And it's a pleasure for me being here and co-chairing this working group with Niels. And it's my pleasure to learn about what the other working groups will be doing as well. Thank you. Yeah. Maybe since I have the floor, maybe I can go straight to see how our work, to give some background on our work. So our working group is actually addresses the issue of nuclear weapons and social justice. Social justice being a principle aiming at equal rights and collective solidarity to reduce the injustice, to do justice to the different members of the society in some ways that are involved in the chain of nuclear weapons. So the issue is relevant now for us to look at, as inequalities have been tolerated until now, and there are important reforms that are needed to do justice. Some of the examples are the fact that there are survivors of bombings, there are victims of nuclear testing, and there are other illegal activities around nuclear weapons. There are minority, there are low-income groups, there are women who are somehow exploited during the production of nuclear weapons in several countries, and their raw materials as well, etc. So in this and many other cases, there is need to do a reform, to bring a recommendation to make justice. So in the case, in these cases, and in many other cases that we will be exploring during about 6 months, so there are the victimized or surviving populations have either lost loved ones, they have developed disease risk, But the struggle is that the struggle for justice and reparation has not always been effective. So it is important now to see this to prevent such injustices. So maybe I will give the floor to Niels to see what will be concretely going on here, what we'll be doing. So Niels, over to you to shed light on what our working group will be doing concretely.
Thank you, Guy. Yes, I will be discussing 3 things to wrap up, which is our contribution, our objectives, and why the Emerging Voices Network is uniquely positioned to do this research on social justice in the context of nuclear weapons. On our contribution, as Guy said, we believe that nuclear weapons cannot and should not be discussed in isolation from considerations of social justice. And yet, these considerations of justice in general and of social justice in particular have remained largely absent from traditional debates about nuclear deterrence, non-proliferation, and arms control. And in nuclear politics more broadly, considerations of justice still generally take precedence over considerations of order still generally take precedence over considerations of justice. And it is often assumed that those 2 values are inherently incompatible. We've seen that the humanitarian initiative has been a catalyst for change in that regard, and young people with a wide variety of experiences have played a crucial role in that initiative. And we think it will also take a diverse group of young people to deepen and consolidate that positive development. So in terms of our objectives, there's twofold. First, in general, we want to increase awareness of the importance of consideration of justice in the context of nuclear politics. And more specifically, we want to create knowledge on a specific issue which remained underexplored in that context. This is, of course, for the working group to still decide which issue we're going to explore, but you could think about the mental and physical health impacts of exposure to low levels of ionizing radiation, intersectional perspectives on the nature of nuclear weapons-related harm, and reparation of that harm, which is often discussed strictly in terms of financial compensation, which is extremely important, but also insufficient to fully reckon with the history of nuclear injustice. And third, why the Emerging Voices Network is uniquely positioned to address these questions. Well, first of all, it is one of the only forums which provides young people and early career researchers with an opportunity to actually make our voices heard by publishing research. But it is also a uniquely global network of early career researchers who bring a wealth of knowledge, perspectives, and experiences to the table. So we're very much looking forward to sharing our research and policy recommendations with you down the line. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you all so much for your fantastic presentations. I think they all gave us a really good overview of the topics that your working groups will discuss and everything that you will be researching and writing on in the next few months. We really hope that these discussions, that these working groups will be having over the next few months will bring some new insights into the field and perhaps change some of the more traditional conversations that we have in this space. Now, moving on to our Q&A. Are there any questions or also reactions you have for the EVN team or our working group chairs here? I think I just saw one from Grant Christopher. I'm just going to read it out. It seems like a fantastic cohort and a very interesting set of topics. Each working group frames topics to focus on reacting to nuclear programs in Europe and the US. Is there any plan to extend these questions with respect to other nuclear armed states? Specifically Russia, China, India, Israel, Pakistan, and North Korea. I'm happy for any working group speakers to consider this. If there are any working group chairs, any of you that would like to take these questions, are any of you already considering, including other nuclear weapon programs? You can take the floor. If you, rather to see where you and your working groups will be going over the next few weeks, that is fine as well. If any of you do want to speak, just let me know now, please.
I think I can go briefly. I think Halima and I touched on this a little bit in our presentation, also recognizing I speak super fast, so you may have missed it. But we touched on a little bit. We're hoping to, I know we will engage with places like Pakistan so that we can have a more holistic understanding of the work that we're doing. I could also see us talking about places like India. There's going to be a lot of different levels in the conversation that we bring to the table. So thanks for raising this. And I do think that we will engage more deeply on a broad set of not just Europe and the US, although racism and white supremacist notions tend to come from colonizer countries, which inherently forces us to talk about them a ton.
Great, thank you so much, Mari. Is there anyone else who would like to say anything about this specific question? Otherwise, we'll be moving on to another one.
I don't mind actually jumping in as well. I think I just enjoy speaking after Mari is what I've decided. But I think that it's a great question, and I think it's definitely something that Ian and I have talked about a little bit, is the fact that we want to make sure that we're approaching this as a global issue to the best of our ability, while also acknowledging the fact that a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues and the solutions in particular really have to be tailored to the specific cultural context in which they exist. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. And part of the reason why it's really great that we get to do this as part of the Emerging Voices Network is because there is such a diverse range of individuals who are a part of this network. We get to draw on the experiences of the different people from different countries who can provide their own perspective on how DE&I issues are addressed well or poorly in their own contexts. And especially because nuclear weapons issues in particular have to be examined as an issue of inequality. You have nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, and the interactions between the two and the decision-making ability of the two are not necessarily equal in the international arena. And so exploring these things is something that we're really excited about, and something that I'm glad is being considered by the audience as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sneha. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to take that as we're moving on to the next question. There was, I think, one specific question for Niels. And the question asked whether you could perhaps elaborate a bit more on why nuclear weapons issues should not be discussed in isolation from social justice. But I also understand, of course, we're still, in the process of just coming up with more details on each of the working group topics. So, Niels, if you do want to say anything else, now you have the chance.
Thank you. I'd be happy to respond to that. I think nuclear weapons cannot and should not be discussed in isolation from social justice or justice in general, because the history of nuclear weapons since the 1940s has had many implications for justice. In that regard, you could think of interstate justice. For example, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is arguably at odds with the principle of sovereign equality, where many countries from the global south give up any right to be protected by nuclear weapons, and other countries are allowed to keep them, or at least to enjoy their alleged benefits. But there have also been many issues of social justice. Nuclear weapons have had many adverse effects on both individuals and communities, even when they're not being used in anger. So, of course, we know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the humanitarian effects of those bombings. But minorities, especially, are also often confronted with many compounding adverse effects of nuclear weapons, even when they're not being used, or when, as you might argue, deterrence works. You could, for example, think about people who've been working in uranium mines, or who've been exposed to radiation due to nuclear tests. So I guess to sort of sum it up, when you talk about nuclear security, it's really important to ask whose security you're actually talking about. And considerations of justice are indispensable in that regard.
Great, thank you, Niels, for your additions to this question. I think for the next one, which is whether there will be any collaboration with the IAEA, I will hand over to Anu.
Thanks so much, Kim. Just checking that I've unmuted myself. So first of all, it's been brilliant to hear everyone speak, and thank you for engaging with questions to our participants, many of whom aren't members of the EVN, so thank you for that. So we mentioned at the beginning of the event, very briefly, that this policy cycle is part of the EVN's broader activity. So the policy cycle focuses on the specific issues that we've discussed today. However, it will feed into the broader EVN strategy. So the EVN, in its 180 members, rather than the small subset of 77 working on this, I say small, it's quite a big group, will be engaging with nuclear policy and international security policy in different ways. One of those those ways that we're working on at the moment is to engage with the General Conference this year. There will be more information on that as and when it happens, but given that we have a lot of people within the cohort who are nuclear safety and security experts or peaceful uses experts, and made recommendations to that end to the NPT last year through a working paper and to the IAEA and CTBT in August, we thought it would be remiss to not include that. So the network itself will definitely be engaging with the agency. We are flexible with what happens with the recommendations of this policy cycle. So policy cycles are deliberately designed to have flexibility in how we capture their value and how we design follow-on work from them. So this will not end here, and it will continue to engage with the greater nuclear policy community beyond the funding cycle, if that makes sense, through other EVN work and potential follow-on work on this project. I hope that answers your question. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Just moving on to the next question, which is Sayeda's question. She says it was a very interesting session, and she would like to know when we will work on the papers officially. So that is also a great time to bring up another reminder that the first working group meeting will be next week, for most groups on Tuesday, for one group on Monday. And that will also be the time when you, as the EVN policy cohort, will also officially start working on, you know, the topics, narrow down any challenges you would like to discuss, and then once you're ready to do that, start drafting a working policy paper. So that will all happen next week. And as you know, feel free to communicate with each other already on Slack, and just get in touch. And we're really, really excited to see where, you know, you're taking these topics and what great suggestions and policy recommendations you will come up with. So I think at the moment we don't have any more questions. I'm going to give you one more minute to see whether there's anyone who would like to add anything else to it. No, I think that's it. In that case, I just would like to thank you so much for joining today. I'd like to give a special thank you to our amazing working group chairs who've done a really, really great job of providing not just, you know, an overview of the topics at hand, but also already real insights into the topics, and have laid out their objectives, and all seem really, really excited and engaged, you know, to get to know their working groups and work with you all over the next few months. Thank you also for everyone else who's joined us and listened to us. Thank you also for some of our external experts who have joined in. We're really, really happy, you know, that you came today and that you were so keen to engage with us. And yeah, we're really looking forward to, you know, seeing the EVN policy cohort members next week for the first meeting. And we're just looking forward to a great policy cycle to come. And I think that's it. So thank you all very much. Thank you for joining, and we all hope to see you latest in July for when we'll release the anthology with the amazing outcomes of all these groups. Thank you so much.